In this video, I look again at my Moza R9 after using it for nearly 2 years and ask, am I still happy with it? Have I made any changes? And do I regret buying a relatively lower powered wheelbase? Let's find out now from an older gamer's perspective. Since I started this YouTube channel, I have released nearly 100 videos, and of all of them, my Moza R9 remains in the top 10 of my most viewed videos. Currently, it's sitting at number 2, with my original 4070 Super review still at number 1, and my T-LCM load cell pedal review at number 3. Links to all of these videos are in the description below. But after nearly 2 years of using the Moza R9, am I still happy with what I've bought with my own money? To answer this question, let me take you through a long-term overview of the Moza R9, show you the changes I've made to the Pithouse software, look at some of my concerns over the heat this unit can generate, and be honest with you about what I would do differently if I had the chance to do it all again.
Diddle-dee-dee, tomorrow's another day.
Thoughts after nearly 2 years of use. The Moza R9 retails in January 2025 at around €400, which is about €70 less than I originally paid 2 years ago, with the second-hand prices of these wheelbases averaging out on eBay at around €300, at least in Germany. So it is a sought-after item and holds its value relatively well, which should tell you something about the popularity, functionality and perceived reliability of the R9 wheelbase. Of course, you don't get an actual wheel with an R9 wheelbase. That would be too easy. So I bought an ES wheel with the R9, which was the cheapest wheel made by Moza at the time. I think it still is. The price then was €150, and that's dropped by only about €20 in the last 2 years. And on the second-hand market, if you can find an ES wheel, they sell for a smidgen less than the retail price. So if I sold the ES wheel and the R9 wheelbase today together in January 2025, I would recoup about 2/3 of what I originally paid 2 years ago. That's not a bad return considering how much fun I've had with this wheel. But I'm not going to sell my R9 because I'm really very happy with it. And if you are looking for a video with a long-term review that says, more or less, that you should buy this wheel, you are probably going to be very happy with your purchase decision, then you can stop watching this video right now and go and order one and have some fun. However, if you want to know the good and the bad and the cooking hot of owning and using an R9 with the ES wheel for 2 years, then carry on watching, because while I'm overall very happy with the Moza R9, there are some things that bother me and some purchase decisions that I would have done differently if I had the chance to do it all again. And I'm also going to show you some diagnostic functions in the Pithouse software that not a lot of people seem to know about, but are really handy if you want to know what's happening inside your wheelbase. Let's take a look.
Wow, now I am excited.
Things I love about the R9. Still with me? That's great. So what do I love about the R9? Well, the first thing is fairly undramatic in that I do love how I don't really need to think too much about the R9 when I sit down to race. I just turn it on and it works perfectly every time. I mean, I could fiddle with the Pithouse settings forever if I wanted. And if you are the type that prefers to optimize rather than just get on and enjoy racing, you will be very happy here. But you don't have to do that, and I certainly don't do it very often. In fact, many weeks can go by without my wanting to open the Pithouse software at all, except to run one of the regular automatic updates, and then maybe think about adjusting some settings just to see if I can optimize my direct drive experience just that little bit more. I'll come back to my Pithouse settings later in this video, but I can tell you that over the last 2 years, these presets have evolved. That being said, these changes have been more to do with my gaining experience in sim racing and my needs changing because of that, rather than any shortcomings of the R9 itself. This wheelbase, once calibrated and set up correctly for each sim I use, has always provided me with more than enough power, and also provides every detail into the textures and lumps and bumps on whatever track I am racing, in whichever sim I am using. I have never been in a position where I thought this unit wasn't powerful enough, driving in iRacing, AMS2, Assetto Corsa, Project Cars, or even AC Evo. The force feedback on the R9 and the power it provides is more than enough for me. Another thing I love about the R9 is it only takes a few seconds to power up and be ready to race. Mine is attached to a mains extension lead with its own off switch, and I turn this off every night. However, once I turn that back on, then hit the little switch on the back of the unit, it really is just a brief amount of time before the whole thing springs to life and is ready to race. The mounting system is also something I love because, again, I never really need to think about it. Once fitted to my rig, the wheelbase has just stayed there. I've never had to retighten any of the bolts that secure the R9 to my GT Omega Art rig, and it has never given any indication of wanting to work itself loose. One thing I would say is that I'm not sure this wheelbase is suited for a desk mounted bracket, partly because of the size, but mostly because the vibration that it kicks out while going over curbs and stuff would probably shake your desk into ill health. There is also the question of how hot this wheelbase gets and the problems that poses for desk mounted systems. I will come back to the question of heat later in this video.
Nervous anticipation!
Things I don't love about the R9. Things I'm not so keen about with the R9 is firstly the so-called quick release mechanism. This holds the wheel to the wheelbase spindle, and sure, releasing the wheel is fairly quick, but getting that wheel back on the shaft and engaged with the locking mechanism can be a very fiddly process. At least that's my personal experience. Others have told me they never have a problem. So maybe this is a me problem and not a R9 problem. I don't know. But still, if you are the type of racer that likes to swap wheels, dependent on the virtual car you are driving, then the R9 might pose some problems for you, as all Mozas will with this quick release system. If it's a problem for you. It's a problem for me, might not be for you. I don't swap wheels, but I still occasionally need to take mine off the spindle when the Pithouse software or the firmware in the wheelbase encounters an update. When this happens, the wheelbase needs to be recalibrated, and to do this, you first need to detach the wheel. And whenever I do that, I seem to spend a frustrating amount of time trying to get it back on again. On the subject of wheels, I am not especially in love with the ES wheel that I purchased with the R9, pretty much out of frugal necessity. There is nothing wrong with the ES wheel, but it's also not very exciting, and I find myself often trying to remember which button does what, and cursing the lack of any actual movable dials for things like brake bias, instead of a plethora of buttons and a single pad. Which brings me back to the main thing I don't like about the R9 wheelbase, or at least the main thing I worry about with the R9. And this is something that comes up in the forums and Reddit and other learned places, and that's the amount of heat the R9 generates while in use. Now, the R9 can output a peak power of 9 Newton meters. It's not delivering that power all the time, and it doesn't need to, but it can peak and drop away many times during the course of an aggressive race. Although these peaks towards maximum Newton power is going to be very dependent on how aggressive your settings are in the sim and the Pithouse software. That being said, if you have the force feedback at a fairly aggressive level, which I tend to do, this unit can get very hot rather quickly. As I mentioned earlier, I'll come back to the question of heat later in this video, but to make sense of that, first let's look at the Pithouse settings I currently use.
Learning is cool.
Pithouse settings. People often ask in the comments, what are my settings for the Pithouse software, or for iRacing, or for any of the other sims that I use? And the honest answer is today they are this, but tomorrow they might be something completely different, depending on what I'm trying to achieve. That being said, by and large, in the Pithouse software, I have stuff mostly turned down or indeed off in order to feel the most raw and unfiltered force feedback information from my sim as possible. So in 2025, my Pithouse settings are adapted from the official preset, which you can access by hovering the mouse over the class of car you're interested in and selecting official from the drop-down list. On the basic tab, steering angle is at 900 degrees. This matches the sim software that I'm using. Soft limit at 1. Soft limit strength to middle. Over on the right, I have the force feedback set to 100% of its capable power, meaning the R9 is delivering a peak power of around 9 Newton meters. Maximum torque I have at the maximum. Hands-off protection I have on in case I let go of the wheel for whatever reason. And the inertia I have set to the wheel I'm currently using, which is the ES wheel. I don't do any drifting, so the maximum wheel speed is set to minimum. Over on the advanced tab, I have everything here either at the minimum or off. The exception is natural dampening, which for me personally adds a little stability to the steering wheel, which I find makes me spin less. I'm not sure if that's placebo or not, but there it is. It's set at 30%. Who knows, in the future that may well be off as well. Over on the right, I have temperature strategy set to radical. This means the unit won't throttle the force feedback unless the temperature of the unit exceeds 60 degrees, whereas the conservative setting over here will throttle power back if the temperature exceeds 50 degrees C. Lastly, I have my force feedback equalizer set like this. But again, this is an individual taste setting, so play with it. And I have the FFB curve set to linear, as I've never found that changing it makes that much difference to my driving style. Again, play with this, see what you come up with. If you have too much vibration or road noises coming through your wheel, back here is the place to turn this down. So if your wheel's rattling, try reducing the number there. See what that does for you. Once you have the settings you like, you can create a preset. Here I choose GT and then give it a name that I will remember and click save. As I said earlier, these settings for me have been kept simple so that anything the sim is outputting doesn't get masked or dampened by any of the settings in the Pithouse software. Now, let's talk about those heat issues.
Oh, it is so hot in here.
Using the Pithouse software to show the R9 temperature. The R9 wheelbase is effectively one large heat sink and it disperses the heat that it builds up through these air-cooled veins around the case and also through whatever it's attached to, in my case the GT Omega Art Rig. But aside from sticking a thermometer up the backside of the R9, how can you easily and accurately figure out the temperature of a Moza wheelbase? This is in fact easy and an integral part of the Pithouse software. You just need to know where to look. You can find the diagnostics by going to System Setting area by clicking here and then here. The report error box is what we're looking for. Don't worry, you are not going to report anything and nothing will be sent anywhere. Instead, enter a single character in the contact information and symptom fields here and here. I have just typed the letter A into each of these fields. Once you've done that, the Save Report button is activated. Click on this and you can save a zip file to your local drive. Once saved, open the archive and inside you will find all sorts of files with all sorts of information. The information we are interested in is called, unsurprisingly, motor temperature log. Extract this file and then double click on it, which should automatically open it in Notepad. As you can see here, these readings go back about 6 months and are updated every 30 seconds when the unit is on. Next to the date are 3 temperature readings. From left to right, they translate as temperatures for controller, MOSFET and motor. You can scroll through this information in Notepad, but there is an even easier way to read this information using an app from Silver Talon. This cool little app can just be downloaded from the silvertalon.net website. I will post a link below. And once you have downloaded it and extracted the contents of the zip file, all you need to do is run this file here, mozatemps.exe. This will bring up this very cool interface. You should then be able to see all your current settings. And by accessing the drop-down menu in the top left, you should be able to show the sessions logged by the Pithouse software for approximately the last 6 months. Here I'm accessing an hour-long session in the GT4 AI race from January 2025, and straight away you can probably see a small problem where the temperature flatlines at 35C and then suddenly climbs to 53C. This is unfortunately a bug in the latest version of the Pithouse software that I'm running here. This causes the diagnostic to stop updating the temperature log while you are racing or connected to sim software. Once you exit the race or close the sim software, depending on which sim you're using, the temperature log is once more able to update its readings. We can see this bug in action here because the flat line occurs when I started an iRacing session, just here, and then when I exit iRacing, we can see the jump to 53C, followed by this slow cool down right here, with the R9 wheelbase gradually returning to what appears to be its base temperature of 35C in a room that has an ambient temperature of 19C. I know this is a recent bug because if I use the Silver Talon software to select a race from September 2024, before the wheelbase received an update from Moza, you can see the diagnostics are reported correctly. Here's a ramp up from the temperature to around 44C while racing and a cool off back to 38C. This is unfortunate, and I hope Moza fix this bug soon. But I'm more interested in peak temperatures anyway, so this method of checking the heat levels of the R9 is still valid and useful in this particular example. Just bear in mind that if you see this flat line, it's not a problem with your R9, it's not a problem with the Silver Talon software, it is just the diagnostics don't report information or don't update the reported information while you are connected to a sim and in a racing session. With that all said, let's take a closer look at the actual results. Operating temperatures of the R9 while racing. So with all that said, and having an understanding that these readings may be imperfect due to a diagnostic reporting bug getting in the way, how hot does my R9 actually get during a race? When I race with iRacing, for example, I use the force feedback auto setting inside the black box, this one here. This auto turns yellow after I do a few laps, and it's calculating what the force feedback should be for the car I'm driving on the track that I'm using. This changes from track to track and of course car to car. Personally, I like to use the auto function but then knock it down a few clicks, as I often find it to be just a bit too strong. But for these tests, I have left it at what iRacing thinks is the ideal setting, whilst leaving the intensity slider in the options menu set to 50%. In this first test, I am in the MX5 at this track. I'm not going to try and pronounce that. And the force feedback has been set by the auto function. This is an AI race set to last 1 hour, and there are 19 AI drivers on the track. I'm using this particular course because it has a lot of corners, and I want to stress the R9 as much as possible for science. The results for that session come back like this. Again, there is this bug that flatlines the readings while I'm accessing the sim, but we can extrapolate the results from what we're seeing here. The temperature of the R9 starts around 34C. This is with an ambient temperature in the room of 19C. And this is where I started the race, at 34C. When I end the race, it's about 53 degrees centigrade. I have temperature control strategy set to radical, which means the R9 shouldn't throttle the force feedback power levels unless the temperature exceeds 60 degrees C. You can see that represented here by this dotted line along the top. As you can see, at 53 degrees centigrade, the R9 is well under that level. Repeating this test again with the GT4 McLaren at the same track, and again racing for an hour with the force feedback set auto function in iRacing, I saw very similar results. Remember, this is with the maximum setting in the Pithouse software and the maximum recommended level of force feedback in iRacing. As an aside, I should also mention the force feedback meter in iRacing was mostly green, with some occasional yellow showing, which is on the edge of the force feedback clipping. But I didn't see any red. I mean, I didn't see any. There may have been brief flashes of it, but there wasn't any prolonged images of redness for me to get worried about. So that's pretty optimal for these tests. And all of this information seems to indicate that the unit is running below maximum temperature guidelines. So there should be no problems with overheating. And I should have no cause for concerns, right? However, I am conducting these tests in January 2025, and winter in Germany is a fairly cold time of year. But once the summer comes, my sim racing room will start to get very hot, and I worry that running the R9 at the radical setting will eventually see the wheelbase hitting 60 degrees. And while the software can protect itself at this temperature by throttling the power back, I do have some concerns over the long-term implications this might have for the unit's overall durability at running it at such a high temperature all of the time. That being said, I've been doing this for 2 years. And nothing has failed in those 2 years of use. So maybe I am worrying over nothing. Maybe. I can tell you in the summer when I'm racing, the wheelbase gets uncomfortably hot. Too hot, really, to safely touch for a prolonged period of time. So if you sim race in a house, perhaps where there are small children or curious animals, this is probably something you're going to need to bear in mind. If you're in a very, very hot country, that's something else you should consider. But overall, yeah, it does feel like the R9 looks after itself and is doing okay with the temperatures. It's a worry, but it's not an actual physical problem, at least not for me in my situation. At least not right now.
They're cool.
Conclusions. So, given all this fun I am having with the Moza R9 and that it seems to be running hot but not hot enough to actually die while racing, do I have any solid reasons for not recommending this wheelbase? The answer is, of course, complicated. On the one hand, the R9 is a great wheelbase that has never let me down, never overheated, despite my fears that it would do if I drove it too hard, has been compatible with pretty much every sim I have ever used, and has been a joy to race with for the entire time that I've owned it. Once calibrated and set up correctly for each sim, the R9 has always offered me more than enough power for me to clearly feel the fine textures of all the tracks I race on in the various sims I own. In short, the R9 is a well-designed and perfectly functioning part of my sim rig.
I feel a butt coming on.
But I do still worry about how hot the R9 gets, especially in the summer months when the ambient temperature in my race room will probably hit 30 Celsius, helped in that direction by my computer pumping out warm air into an already humid atmosphere. Sure, I could get busy with a 3D printer and some fans and actively cool the R9, but I don't really want to put up with the extra noise. I could also reduce the R9's power to about 80% in the Pithouse software, and this would probably go a long way to reducing how hot the R9 gets. But as a sim racer, not getting the full power from the equipment I have paid for feels vaguely wrong. And it has to be said, so far in the 2 years of almost constant use, the worries about the R9 dying from getting too hot have simply never materialized. And I certainly have never felt my R9 drop in force feedback power levels or even completely lose force feedback due to overheating. Maybe I'm just lucky, maybe. Or maybe I should just stop worrying about it and just enjoy the R9 for however long it lasts, or until I find an upgrade I like. Speaking of upgrades, however much the R9 getting hot might weigh on my mind, the thing I most regret buying is the ES wheel. Like I say, it's not a bad wheel, and I have no real complaints about it other than it being a little bit on the boring side, and it has this odd texture to it that makes my hands sweat. I normally drive with gloves, but I chose not to for this video so you could see more clearly what I was doing with my hands. That process reminded me of how much the material feels like dead flesh and how much I hate that. Currently, I'm tempted by the KSGT wheel from Moza, which does seem to have all the dials I might need and looks more suitable for both the style of racing I enjoy and my overly large hands. If I get one, I will of course drop a review on this channel. At the end of the day though, I would say if you are looking for a direct drive wheel to upgrade from say a T300 like I did, the Moza R9 is definitely worth thinking about. Just get a better wheel than the ES one if you can afford it, and maybe think about those heat levels if you live in a very hot location. Let me know in the comments if you are thinking of buying a wheelbase or if you have recently bought one and what your decisions were and why. In the meantime, I hope you found this video helpful, and until the next one, race clean and I'll see you on track. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe. Click the little bell icon if you want to be notified of any future videos.